Welcome to Real Talk in ELT, a podcast that talks about the reality of teaching English. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Real Talk in ELT. It's Kelly. I am by myself today, and I'm going to be talking about incentives and motivation and why I do things in my own personal business. Hey, just kind of a glimpse into my perspective on things. And all of this was motivated by a podcast that I was listening to. So I was listening to a podcast interviewing this professor. He's in Israel, and he was talking about, he's a behavioral economist, and he was talking about incentives and why people do the things that they do, and what gets them into that positive feedback loop, right? And so he was talking about some of the mechanisms behind it, from his perspective, because as he's a behavioral economist, he looks at things both on the business, he's big into business. He looks at things both in the mechanical way that an economist would look at it, but also the psychological way that maybe a psychologist or a psychoanalyst would look at it, and kind of tries to combine the two. I thought it was a really interesting perspective. And then I started reflecting on, well, what do I do in my practice as a small business owner? So I have my own company, but it's just me, and I run everything, and I have to deal both with my regular English clients, and I deal with mentoring and teacher training. And so I've kind of got my hand in multiple pots here. And so, what does that look like, and how can we get people in, how can we incentivize people to continue forward, which I think is really, really important for me, at least, as a business owner, because I want my clients to continue to do well. So this whole idea, again, these are my reflections. I'm not an expert in this, but it got me to thinking about how I run my business and how other people might want to start reflecting a little bit more, because I think that sometimes we just run heads on into things and into situations before reflecting on it a little bit. And okay, so here we go. I'll just jump into it, and then we'll see what comes out of it. So incentives, for this professor, he said that they're really more about a person's story than something that's universally good for everyone. And if we start thinking about people as individuals, not lumping them into categories, and saying, well, this is a business student, they fall into my business student category, and I can incentivize all of them with the same incentives, and they will all, move forward. I liked this idea because as I get older and as I work with more and more people, I'm starting to realize that everybody's just kind of an individual. And yeah, so there's two kind of components that he was talking about when it comes to why people do the things that they do. And I think if we know why people do the things that we do, it's much easier for us to identify an incentive for them. So the two components that he was describing, and there might be more, again, I was just listening to this podcast, and I was like, oh, this is very relatable. Maybe this is something that would help other people. So the first one is, there's two types of signaling. So there's the components he was talking about: social signaling and self-signaling. Social signaling is pretty much what I want others to think of me. And self-signaling is what I want to think about myself. And of course, humans are social creatures, and so we care about what others think. We also have this need to feel good about ourselves, and to kind of have self-awareness, and to make sure that we are good people. But because we are social by nature, it is important what others think of us. And so these are the two types of signaling that he was talking about. And I think this kind of taps into the motivation of why people do the things that they do, and what the general perspective of people is, both outside and inside, and how that plays into how we can select incentives that are actually motivating for our clients. Okay. So let me, this is my take on it too, because as I was listening to him describe this and give some examples, I thought, well, Both of these are very much dependent on how much information both social people have and yourself you have about a scenario. And let me kind of break it down and give you an example so it's more tangible. So imagine that there's a teacher that's offering a free webinar about lesson planning. We've seen this before, or reading skills, or whatever you want to look at, intercultural training, or business English, or English for specific purposes, teaching young learners, whatever. There's a teacher online, hey, I've done this. Many of my friends have done this. They go online and they advertise that they're going to have an event, whether it be a webinar or an in-person event, whatever they're going to do. They're going to have a webinar, or even they're offering free downloadable things or whatever. I also do this. I have multiple friends that do this, right? We create products or content, I would say, whether it be as a webinar or a physical downloadable, and we offer it for free. And so your self-signaling of that is, look at me. I mean, if this is the only information that we have, right? I'm creating something, I'm putting it on the internet. Everybody is seeing that I'm putting on the internet for free and I'm advertising that. My self-signaling be, look at me, what a good person I am, because I truly care about other teachers and I'm really interested in professional development. And so here I go. I'm going to offer something for free out of the goodness of my heart. And the social signaling to that too is probably people look at this person, I mean, with all the other personal biases aside, of course, because some people don't like other people, some people have opposing opinions, but in general, people are going to look at that teacher and say, hey, that's quite a nice thing. What a generous thing to do. That's quite nice that they're offering content for free or an event for free. That's quite a nice thing to do. That's based off of the information that you have at the moment, that a teacher is developing something and offering it for free. But if we look a little bit deeper, and there always is there's always something to kind of look into. There's always more information behind things. If we dig a little bit deeper, and more information is discovered that this teacher works with a business manager, and the business manager says, hey, listen, whenever you have an event online or whenever you post something and you have at least 40 people that attend the event or download the content that you're providing, you get 2 to 3 new clients that order full courses from you, whether it be training courses or whatever. They order a full package. And so with that information, this altruistic, generous teacher with social signaling, if people have that information, now becomes a greedy capitalist. And you as a person say, well, I'm offering it for free, but I also would like to have more clients because I need to scale up my business a little bit more. And then you have, I'm a good person, but, also I need to have the benefits of putting all the effort into this. Still, maybe your self-signaling is a good person. But you can see how it changes, perception changes, and stories change depending on how much information you have. This is why we need to investigate things and make sure that we have all the information before we make judgments. Side note, as humans, we should be able to do this. Anyways, so then the motivations sometimes are questioned, right? So if we see somebody that's doing something and we have a little bit more information and then we have a preconceived notion of what that means, well, in reality, this person is not a greedy capitalist. They're just trying to pay their bills. Whether you accept it or not, we live in a capitalist society, so we need to make money to be able to pay our bills, to have a decent quality of life. That is the reality. Until the system changes, you can't fault people for doing that. So then I started to think about my students and I said, well, a lot of people that come to me, I'm going to give you kind of like the two scenarios. So business English students that come to me, they work in businesses. Usually it's kind of like a multinational business, something along those lines. And they have a specific image of themselves and they would like to live up to that image. So let's say they have an image of themselves becoming a manager, a director, a high level, something within a company, or that's the typical business English person that comes to me. So, okay, so they have this image that they want to attain, they want to achieve that image. And so them taking classes with a private English teacher gives them a good positive self-signaling that I'm doing something to better myself, right? And another motivation comes from the social signaling of it, because their peers and the people that they work with, their colleagues, their bosses, anybody in the hierarchical structure of business is then looking at them and saying, well, they're making strides, they're investing in themselves, and they're making strides towards what they want to become, which would be a more proficient and more well-rounded professional that can function at higher levels within the company. Fine. So then what's the incentive there? Well, they have the motivation because as soon as they say, well, I'm taking English classes, they feel better about themselves. And they also, their peers who might know that they're taking English classes also think, look at him or her improving themselves and doing well. Great. Fantastic. But what's the incentive for them to keep going? That's the trick, right? So I've done a podcast episode on learner journals, learner portfolios, things like that, because sometimes that might be a motivational tool. Why? The incentive there is that they continue to pay for their courses and there's the services that you're providing for them, but also what they get out of it is they see progress. So maybe that's an incentive that they need. Maybe another incentive that they need is at some point, they need to be able to do a task or accomplish a specific function in their job, and they finally do it. Great. But all of these incentives, because we're not a company, we're not selling products to people. So I can't say, well, if you buy 9, then I'm going to give you the 10th for free or something like that. I mean, that's just not, we're offering a service. So you can do that, but I'm not into giving discounts. This might get me canceled. Here's why. Because I know that my value that I charge for my classes is fair. The amount of time that I've spent investing in myself, my knowledge, knowing how to do things, my professional skills, and putting things together, providing a very customized experience for my business English learners, I'm not going to reduce my price. I'm going to give you another incentive to keep going. And that it's my job to kind of find that incentive. So as people start accomplishing things, they start seeing progress, they're able to do something. They come back with a really great story of, hey, I was on this conference call working with somebody from God knows where, and we were really able to communicate and we got everything done and I felt much more comfortable. Like, that's an incentive for that person. So then I know this. And so it's our teaching responsibility to find those incentives. Incentives don't always have to be monetary, because in reality, if you're giving discounts and things like that, then what you're saying is my services aren't priced at the correct value for me. This is my perspective. You can do it however you want. If you want to offer discounts, then offer discounts. If that's something financially that you can do and you're fiscally responsible, do what you want. But what I've found as more substantial motivation that has a larger impact over the course of time is not financial discounts. Well, let me give you 10, 15% off, or I'll give you, pay for a package of 10 classes and I'll give you 12. I don't find that to be motivating for my students, because usually they have very, very specific objectives. And so I have to find the incentives during the course to be able to get them somewhere. So that's kind of how I saw this, that was my interpretation when I'm dealing with students. Now, dealing with teachers is a whole different ball of wax, because dealing with teachers is that I'm trying to find incentives for them to be open and willing to suggestions of changing what they think and who they are and their general practices, which is much more difficult. And so one of the things that I realized is that we can't again, I'm listening to this podcast and I was thinking, and I was running at the time. So it was just kind of like, like, I don't know, maybe the adrenaline and exercising while listening. And I got really creative about this. But anyways, we can't really send mixed signals. So teachers usually come to me because something's not going right in their business, or they don't feel comfortable expanding or scaling their business up. So typically people say, I have these students and I don't know what to do with them. I don't feel really comfortable in the classroom because I don't think I have the professional skills. Summarizing, right? I've seen some of your free workshops or free content and I like how you approach things. And so that's it. That happens too. And guess what? I'm not a greedy capitalist. It is what it is. I use that as a marketing tool. And I know that it's a marketing tool, but you get benefit from it and I get benefit from it. So you get some good content and good materials. And, if you decide to come and work with me, then that's great too. I actually just don't see the problem in that, but okay. I am generously offering content and things like that in my time usually, but at the same time, there needs to be a return on investment. The return on investment is the more free and interesting things that I give to people, eventually they turn into colleagues, potentially they recommend people and people start, paying for services or getting packages or things like that. So, I mean, not everything is like, well, I'm going to do something for free so that I can get more people. No, I mean, that's not, I'm not really a super greedy capitalist, but at the same time, I know that if I give things away, eventually it'll come back. So I'm a big believer in karma. So anyways, so teachers usually come to me because they've got some sort of issue, but I can't. Here's the thing about it. I'm actually trying in mentoring or training sessions, I'm trying to change you. It sounds bad, but I'm trying to change you with a genuine heart, change you for the better so that your business is successful. And I think the best way to describe how I deal with teachers is similar to how I view management. So when I worked in business and when I was managing and doing things like that and working on like employee programs and blah, blah, blah. When I did that, this is my perspective of what a manager is. If I am your manager or your leader or your trainer or however you want to describe me, if I'm in a hierarchical position above you and I train you or lead you or give you information or help you in such a way that you become more successful than I am, however you decide to measure your success, then that means I'm successful. I'm not intimidated by people that do better than me. I'm not intimidated by people that make more money than me. I actually think if I've had a hand in that, that's just proof that I know what I'm doing. So I take that perspective into every single like mentoring session and training course. If I can get these people to perform higher than the way that I'm performing at the moment, then I've been successful. So because I go into training this way and mentoring this way, and I have this vision of I want you to be as successful as possible. And if that means more successful than me, then that's fantastic, however you want to measure that. But because I'm trying to change people, I think that we can't give mixed signals about incentives. Because what happens is, so let's say a lot of my training goes like this. Let's talk about what's making you uncomfortable. I'm just going to give a very basic example. Teaching skills lessons. Receptive skills lessons. Okay, so you have a problem with teaching receptive skills lessons. You don't really know how to approach it. You don't know how to attack it. A lot of my training and mentoring goes like this. Here's some ideas that I take from people who know much more than I do. Here's some resources. Here's some reading. And here, let's brainstorm together. And here's 1, 2, 3 ways that you could do it. Now go off and experiment. And this is usually why my training and mentoring sessions, we have a kind of, not as significant, but a kind of a large gap. We have a session and then there's a gap in between, because I want people to go off and experiment with it and say, be creative, do whatever you think is appropriate, read the resources, try something new in class, action research, do you. And then they go off and then they come back and I say, okay, so what's been going on? What's been happening? What have you been able to implement and what have the results been? And I'm not always looking for positive results. When people come back to me, I think sometimes they have this feeling like, oh yeah, it was nice. And you don't have to placate me. Kelly, that was terrible. I did this. Here's what I did. I did this, and this was the procedure that I used. And I was based off of this resource that you gave me, and it was awful. And the class was terrible and the students complained. And then I did it with another class and then I had the same negative results. Great. Here's the thing. I can't send mixed signals. Ooh, well, you shouldn't have done that then. You shouldn't have tried it with the second class. That's mixed signals, because what I'm doing in my mentoring sessions is I'm trying to get you to be creative and to think outside the box, because something's not currently working now. So we have to find what works for you. What works for you might not be what works for me. And we have to go for a range of people and authors and suggestions to put together, obviously based in some sort of theory, methodology, some science behind it, something that's backed by empirical data. Obviously, we're not just recreating the wheel here, but something within those parameters, right? That it has something of substance that backs it up. And you got to try it. But when you try something and it fails, we cannot send mixed signals as mentors, trainers, teachers. We cannot send mixed signals to whomever we're working with saying, well, you shouldn't have done that. Well, that's not what I recommended. Yeah, exactly right. It's because it's not you in that scenario. It's them. So then you say, I'm never going to tell people, okay, try this. Try to think outside the box. And as soon as they do, and it's unsuccessful, and penalize them. That's not incentivizing at all. So then you look and you say, okay, well, this is what you did, and this was unsuccessful. Here was your kind of intuition, and here was your idea behind it. So let's see if we can find something and mold a different path or find a different framework or something along those lines. Great. And we need to look at lessons learned, because nobody's going to change themselves. Students, teachers, no one's going to change themselves ever if they're always being punished for doing something that they've been led to do. I can't lead you to creativity, and as soon as you're creative, punish you because it doesn't work out. No, we just have to say, okay, this didn't work. Let's try something else. This is what action research is all about. You go, you have a theory, you have based in methodology, based in some sort of science or empirical data, or you read a paper and it was an interesting find. Okay, great. So then you try it. Didn't work. Try it again. Modify it a little bit. Try it again. Didn't work? Great. Lessons learned. What was your intuition here? We just looked at it from the wrong perspective. And so I think when it comes to teachers, more so than students, I mean, with students, yes, also this kind of plays a role, but with teachers, because I'm asking them to rethink their teaching philosophy, to rethink their teaching practice, to change their teaching context sometimes, which is hard. We can't send these mixed signals, because if we're trying to give them an incentive to move forward, the incentive can't be creative and then be penalized if you fail. No, be creative, never be penalized if you're failing, but always go back and kind of do an incident report, we can say. I mean, that's very, like, I guess, business terms. We can use that. An incident report. What happened? Why did it happen? What could we change? What can we keep? What can we throw out? And move forward. So when we think of incentivizing teachers, it's more on the lines of getting them to try things and finding their own path, but at the same time, not penalizing them for any failure. Because Going back to these kind of principles that this behavioral economist was talking about, social signaling is like what I want other people to think of me as a teacher. Working with other teachers, I want people to think it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to fail, it's okay to have problems. That's fine. But what I would like people to think of themselves is that if I have a problem, I'm able to problem solve, do a little bit of action research, figure out the best way, and get myself out of a jam. So just being resourceful and being resilient and being independent. And I think those are good qualities for self-signaling too. There's a lot of stuff that's floating around the internet nowadays, and easy fixes and do this because my methodology is best and I know how to do this because I've created my own method and all of that craziness. And I think if we take a step back and look at our motivations of using these things or doing these types of things, for example, if you just want the easy way out because you're going to get, I don't know, 10,000 sales on Hotmart from your new course on whatever you decide to do a course on. I mean, okay, people are going to see you successful for a moment, but is that really going to be fulfilling for you? And the self-signaling there is, well, I made a lot of money, but I did it in kind of a dishonest way. I think it just kind of boils down to your motivations and your morals and how you want morals and values and how you want to be perceived, how you are okay with yourself being perceived and how others are perceiving you. So yeah, this got kind of deep, a little deep, but motivation is a tricky thing. And I've always been interested in motivation, and I've read a lot of stuff on self-efficacy and motivation, and I'm a huge fan of Albert Bandura, and I like looking into things, especially with adult education, because that's primarily what I deal with, adult education and andragogy and things like that, which also tap into motivation. And this motivation I think is extremely elusive, and we have to try and find it in any way possible. And ironically enough, I stumbled onto this random podcast from this Israeli professor who's a behavioral economist. And a lot of what he said made sense. And it came at it from a different perspective than the traditional psychological perspective of motivation. And so yeah, I think that there are components, and I don't think it's as measurable and as easy as being, looking at the economy and just using kind of a formula. I don't think it's that. I think there's also a human component to it. So there's this story that we're trying to tell, and our incentives and motivation change over time. It's not something that's going to be long lasting. And I don't think that usually we always look to, as teachers, we always look to monetary, because unfortunately, that's how, unfortunately or fortunately, I mean, I think it's just a fact that if we see something with a high value, we think quality. And if we see something with a good discount, then we think, ooh, I'm getting high quality for less. And so we always kind of turn to monetary, whereas I think incentives aren't always monetary. And I don't think teachers need to always lower their prices to get and capture new students and clients. And I don't think that's a very sustainable business model either. I think if your prices are fair for the services that you offer, and you offer quality, and you have a price that's, aligned with that, then that's fine. But motivation in giving people incentives to kind of get that into that positive feedback loop to keep their motivation high, the incentives, I don't think they have to be monetary. But I do think it takes a little bit of investigation, and it takes quite a bit of rapport building and relationship building with your own clients to find what works for individual students, what works for, if you work with teachers like I do, what works for teachers. and it's not always the same. So feedback for them is not always going to be the same, and how you structure their course might not always be the same. And anybody that's trying to formulate, well, this is the path that all of my students go on. So as soon as they enter in as business students, these are the incentives that I give them. This is how I keep their motivation going. And that is applicable for this huge group of people. I think that's not going to work. It's not going to work for them. It's not going to work for teachers that you train. It's not going to work for clients you deal with. I think it's very individual. And I think that if you can incorporate that idea, then your course has a lot of value, because you're taking into consideration that this person is an individual and their incentives are going to change and be very individual along the course. So that's it for today. Those are my reflections from listening to this. He was brilliant, this professor in Israel. So I thought it was interesting. Anyways, I hope to see you soon, and I'll be back with another episode. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and ELT. Want to join the conversation? Head on over to Instagram at Kelly Pennington ELT and send me a message. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube or Spotify channel to stay up to date. And of course, take care of yourself, your health, your vibe, and your tribe. Until next time.